It's the Burning Crusade. Specifically, it's March 2008. We're about to see a giant fall, a phoenix rise from the ashes, and then burn out just as quickly as it appeared. My name is Preach, and we are going to be looking at the birth and death of WoW's first super guilds.
On the 5th of June 2007, WoW juggernaut Nihilum brought down Illidan's Stormrage in another spectacular and expected world first. Blizzard then announced the war was not over. Kil'jaeden was coming and the battle for the TBC top guild was still up for grabs.
At this point in our story, we have three top contenders. The champions, of course, Nihilum, the guild that came so close, Death and Taxes, and now an ever-present but rising star, the guild known as Curse.
You are not prepared.
Then a twist. For the first time, a WoW guild becomes fully sponsored by an esports organization. In early 2008, Curse becomes SK Gaming. This is a huge moment in history. Before this, money in WoW raiding was limited to headset and mouse deals like Nihilum was with mouse sports. But now investors were seeing the potential profits to be made on the race to world firsts. Just like we are with our community-made mousepad, which is available now. This was drawn by our community over the subathon. We are not making money on this. We're selling this at pretty much cost. So if you want one of these and you like our stuff, it has something like 160 references to all the games and even a little tribute to Bendog on there. So check the link below.
In Nihilum, things were becoming dire. In the words of the ex-members that we spoke to, the guild was eroding internally. The old guard was burnt out and leaving. But why? They just got the world first. Let's think back. The Burning Crusade launched in January. It came with tiers 4 and 5. The important dates here, though, are on the 22nd of May, Blizzard released the Black Temple, tier 6. Kael'thas Sunstrider did not die world first until the 25th of May, 3 days after it came out. That meant, if you do the math, Nihilum had been pushing world first raiding non-stop for 5 months.
Things get sketchy from here, as it always does when guilds begin to collapse. Externally, they had another world first, and the community saw them as untouchable. Internally, though, many problems were surfacing. Players were leaving, they were burning out. At this time, Kungan was regularly disappearing after raid progress. His celebrity status was just rising and rising, and as such he was attending more live events, becoming more focused financially for himself and for the guild. Some members didn't care about this. Yes, he was the main tank, but they're Nihilum. Other players were easily able to step into that role during simple farm raids. However, some saw the lack of a leader regularly being around as enhancing and double downing the cliques that we talked about in our previous video. There were many up-and-coming players who wanted to be part of the world first guild. But as member Buzzkill recounts in his blog at the time, the guild was a shadow of its former self. And they had the worst tanks in the history of World of Warcraft. It's needless to say, the roster heading into the Sunwell was very weak.
At the same time as all that, Death and Taxes closed its doors. About 2 months before their official goodbye post, they had become the target of the WoW community. Why? Well, a post had appeared on the front page of their website, a lengthy post, involving lots of relationship drama within the guild, including some very NSFW content about some of its members. Now, obviously, we can't show that in this video, but here's the Emperor of Man to distract you from that. They tried to remove it very quickly, but the internet is the internet. And once it's out there, it's copied, duplicated, and saved for all time. In their official post, they laid the blame at running out of steam, people not being interested anymore, the usual things you would expect. But needless to say, the once mighty challenger that had come so close, so many times, was just one of the first dominoes to fall of the WoW super guilds.
With Nihilum struggling to field a roster worthy of their name, SK Gaming were riding a high. Mech and Maxter, the leadership, were out to prove they were worthy of their newfound esports authenticity. And so the door was wide open. Blizzard then screwed it up. The gaming development world was becoming increasingly concerned with the amount of time players were spending in their games. The Burning Crusade was wildly successful, but as we mentioned, players had been grinding endlessly for months and months by now, and the mainstream media was starting to take notice. As such, Blizzard decided they would help players by restricting their access to the new Sunwell raid. This time, the raid would be divided into chunks and bosses would release in a staggered state. Once you had killed the available bosses, the world first race would come to a dead stop until the next bosses were released the following reset. The whole situation threw the raid scene into chaos. You were only winning up to a point, and then the competition had days, maybe even a full week, to catch up and be right back at even footing. Nihilum, of course, felt this the worst. They simply couldn't invest and raid like they were used to and wanted to. It is universally agreed that their only world first there, the Eridar twins, was an absolute fluke. After a progress raid, Kungan asked a few members to stick around so he could science the boss's threat table because it was confusing. In doing so, he saw a strat to kill the boss, and so the very next day, they did. It was so surprising to the rest of the guilds working on this boss that it led to absolute crazy theories of Nihilum standing on the light poles in the room to bypass all the mechanics. You can learn more about that in our Crazy WoW Theories video linked below.
Muru was the death knell for Nihilum. In the words of one of the members, Buzzkill, "We failed badly. In the most frustrating stint of progress I've ever been at. We had to suffer through people I hated the most in the world doing the most important roles. We suffered through incompetence of certain individuals that shouldn't even get to see farm." Starim, another player, who was absent at the time but still a member of Nihilum, he went on to say this: "The core of the guild eroded, and new recruits weren't there long enough to really be Nihilum. It was just a collection of people who kind of knew each other, who were just trying to hold on to that number one spot."
At this point, betrayal. Neg, long-time Resto Shaman of Nihilum, suddenly appears in SK Gaming. He saw the writing on the wall for the world champs and he defected to the other side. And it worked. SK Gaming picked up both Muru and Kil'jaeden world first, dethroning Nihilum for the first time since Kel'Thuzad in vanilla. This should have been the rise of a new champion, but that's not to be the case. Similar to Nihilum, there are conflicting reports from members of SK Gaming of what happened next. Firstly, they're dropped by SK Gaming. SK's official statement on the matter was that PvE wasn't for them, and instead they would focus all their efforts into PvP esports. Some believed that it was just a mutual decision. Others believe SK Gaming was an org and was very disappointed in how Blizzard was running the race to world first with the staggered bosses, and without a proper race, there was just no money to be made. But that seems untrue from what we can find. Some suggest to us that despite claiming the world first, many members were dragged along into the super hardcore progress mindset and certainly didn't want to do this long term or see a career out of it, especially with no tangible return on the time investment. Remember though, this is still in the days before full-time gamers, so they were actively disrupting their own real lives to day raid and take part in the race.
However, now is the downtime. Kil'jaeden fell on the 25th of May 2008, exactly 12 months after Kael'thas had fallen. Wrath of the Lich King is not scheduled to launch until November of the same year. This meant that there was 6 months of zero raid progress for these guilds.
Behind the scenes, there was more happening than could be predicted. Suddenly, a website appeared and began circulating amongst the community that just read 25th November. This was to be a few days after Wrath of the Lich King launch. More details followed in the form of a press release. It was so professional, so sanitized. Since when do guilds do press releases? The important point was that SK Gaming and Nihilum, former rivals and champions, were merging together. They were forming the first super guild. Obviously, the community went wild with this news, but how? How did it come about for these players?
In an interview with Mech, we got some more details. SK Gaming was interested only in PvP, not PvE, and the guild wasn't interested in changing. But their investors behind it were interested in something new. Something that would be a new brand, a new web presence, and the pitch was this. Currently, the World of Warcraft PvE community is split in two, similar to as it is today. We have Liquid and we have Echo. Back then, SK Gaming, Nihilum. What if we could bring those two together? What we could do then is create a one-stop shop for all fans of high-end raiding to visit. And then we could bring in other guilds. We could have articles, guides. It would be the only place you would visit for good PvE information. And in turn, that means money.
Guild mergers typically mean one thing: death for one of the guilds. The players knew this. Power vacuums are created when new leadership forms, and you'll notice that the guild leaders of 25th November were 2 members of SK, Mech and Maxter, but 1 from Nihilum's side. Just Kungan. Speaking to the members of Nihilum, they desperately wanted 2 Nihilum members in leadership. As discussed, Kungan's motivations in some players' eyes were shifting. He was becoming a star, increasingly absent from the day-to-day of the guild, and now a more formal, business-motivated future was looming. But who could that second representative be? In Nihilum's eyes, there was only one man for the job: Close. He was there from the early days, he was a figurehead of many players, he was trustworthy, and he took no nonsense. There was one problem though. After interviewing Close about this, he simply didn't see a way that he could be in leadership and it not be just Kungan's guild. That he wouldn't have the influence that the people were hoping would take place, because that's just not how Nihilum was run. He didn't want the job, and no one else did either. So let's get to the nuts and bolts of how this is going to work. It's over 60 players total between the 2 guilds. Who joins? Who gets to play? It was discussed that each guild was given the power to veto one of the players from each guild they didn't want for whatever reason they wanted, no questions asked. SK vetoed one of Nihilum's best shamans, Anise. No details on why from anybody. Nihilum vetoed Tigor, the SK warrior, but they also had a special request. Neg. Poor Neg, who could never have ever foreseen these events coming. The betrayer, who had jumped from Nihilum to SK for the world first. Of course, the Nihilum players really did not want to see his face again, and so as a special exception, he got the boot. The very first actions of this guild upset a lot of people. 25th November leveled and completed all of the Wrath of the Lich King raids in 3 days. The news swept across the player base like a tidal wave. It started rampant reports that Wrath of the Lich King had been made easy mode, which wasn't exactly true, but it certainly appeared that way at first. This was the best result that 25th November could have hoped for. They were the talk of the town, and no one else was even close. 20 days later, the date finally arrived, 25th November. Ensidia had arrived. Their announcement, though, was not super well received. A lot of people were salty about what they had done in raiding, and the funding from Dubai made it feel like a greedy move. And there was an arrogance in their comments, as if their dominance over the game was all but assured.
So you're probably wondering, how many world firsts did Ensidia get? Well, if we discount the launched normal modes, there were 32 big bosses that came out in the Wrath of the Lich King. Ensidia got 3 of them. Now let's not get too far ahead. It's relatively normal, like it is today, for a lot of guilds to pick up the early bosses of a new raid launch. However, by ICC, Ensidia didn't get a single one. And by the time Halion, the Twilight Destroyer, was stood in front of those players. Ensidia, World of Warcraft's first super guild, was done. So what happened?
Ulduar was their best of the entire expansion. They had to play around all kinds of weird things. They opted to go normal mode in the first reset to get that Yogg normal world first, get their name in lights, and they did. They ignored the heroic mode entirely after early reports from the US said that they were jank and buggy. Their overall goal was Algalon Heroic, which wouldn't be a week 1 kill for anyone, and as far as any player knew, was the official final boss of the raid. This was a big issue though. Some guilds were killing Heroic Hodir week 1, he was way easier. Blizzard then buffed the boss for the following week 2 reset. It turned from an easy one into an unrealistic DPS check. But the guilds who had killed it in that first week got to keep their credit and didn't need to do it again to unlock Algalon. Ensidia did. So the big brains at work discovered they could kite the flowers from Freya's room into the Hodir encounter to spell steal their damage buff. This maneuver became known as flower power, and Ensidia was having to do the extraordinary to maintain their presence, and they more than rose to the occasion. Once again though, this utterly annoyed the community. In their eyes, Ensidia was cheating, and their progress was not legitimate. It's safe to say though, at this point in time, they were undoubtedly the best players in the world. The issue is these kind of weird moves had to keep happening. Their shining moment was overcoming Mimiron Firefighter, widely considered to be the hardest fight in the raid a full 2 weeks before the World's Second. This opened Algalon's doors. Once again, similar to Sunwell, Blizzard tried to be clever, to be different. Algalon was special and would only be available for 1 hour per weekly reset for progress. Which is fine, if the bridge to Algalon's platform actually spawns, which it didn't for Ensidia. In total, Ensidia got around 40 total minutes of attempts at the boss over 2 weeks. It didn't matter though. They were so far ahead. They claimed that world first. Drinks were had, champagne corks were popped, and they sat back. Cocktails and celebrations all round.
That is until you got more information. Wrath of the Lich King was a weird time. You might have gone and killed Algalon, but then we started to hear things about other things, and then we find out that actually Algalon isn't the true last boss. In fact, it's Yogg-Saron on Zero Lights, and if you haven't done that, you're essentially poor. In fact, most of you who have played Wrath of the Lich King might consider yourself a raider, but maybe you're not. Let's do a chart to find out. For example, did you kill Sartharion? No, you're not a raider. You did. No, you didn't. You didn't ask if it's 3 drakes or not. Is it 3 drakes? Yes. Did you do it when it was current? No, you didn't. You're not a raider. Oh, you did. Then you definitely went on to do Immortal and do Glory, right? No, you didn't. Then you're Roger Brown.
Back to the raid you go to do a buggy, awkward boss after you have had the rush of finishing progress. In Ensidia's own words, no one could be bothered. Stars picked up the world first, and frustration within the guild was growing at an alarming rate.
Look, there's a lot to unpack here, so I'm going to be brief. It's not even that dissimilar to what happened to Nihilum in the past, and honestly, it's the same thing that happens to most guilds that break apart. Ego, arguments amongst leadership, a lack of direction, all those things occurred, but combined with that was their celebrity status. They were so popular and streaming didn't exist that thousands upon thousands of people made characters on their realm. That meant that the realm became a laggy, buggy mess. They couldn't even get a full roster of people inside the raid to play. So they decided to server transfer. However, it's not hard to make a new level 1 character on Ensidia's new server. So people did. Cliques formed, players were quitting left and right, and the new recruits just weren't welcome, or they simply were not up to the ability level needed.
In Trial of the Crusader, they got the Valkyr twins world first. But what they didn't realize was this was to be the last world first they would ever get. Their jaded and bitter attitude was exacerbated by the rise of a new star, a Finnish-only guild named Paragon. In Ensidia's eyes, they weren't even surprised that Paragon killed an Uberak before them, given how the guild was functioning internally, but they thought their kill was cheap. Paragon had bypassed the hardest part of the encounter using a stun that didn't seem to have a diminishing return. But the community just didn't care. They cheered. They cheered wildly for this Rocky-style underdog rising to the top, to Ensidia's disbelief. Needless to say, a lot of the community were happy to see this titan get dethroned.
By Icecrown Citadel, many players had already quit, and worse than that, people were openly declaring that as soon as Arthas's face hit the floor, they were done. They were over it and just wanted it to be done as soon as possible. A big bone of contention amongst the leadership, who was struggling to steer this ship in the right direction, was comms. Mech had come to the conclusion that it was actually going to be reserved for just him, Kungan, and Maxter to talk, and anybody who didn't like comms could mute it in between pulls to stop listening to everybody else. Now obviously there was a lot of people who just wanted to talk and have fun while they were raiding, rather than play under some bizarre strict rules.
It was at this time Ensidia was invited to a Blizzard event in Germany where one of the Ensidia players, Tun, openly said "King Germans" on camera. Ensidia was not to be invited to any event again after this half-hearted apology. The Saronite bomb incident has been covered extensively. A 72-hour ban for their main characters certainly didn't help morale, whether you believe it intentional or not. Ensidia did just go and re-kill the boss on alt, proving it absolutely wasn't necessary to cheat, but it was another blow to an already fractured guild. As Paragon once again took away the world first, it was doomsday for Ensidia. Broken, miserable, and defeated, they limped lightly on, but it was over.
The tale we've told you today is one of greatness and tragedy. Ego, lack of clear leadership, overconfidence, all are present in the rise and the fall of WoW's first super guild. One thing's for sure, just putting amazing players together does not a great guild make. It takes friendship, it takes a united atmosphere, and it takes a simple, clear goal that all these different personalities can unite behind. Something the Chinese Supergirl Team Asta could have learnt from. But that, of course, is a story for another time. My name's Preach. I hope you've enjoyed this, and if you do want to see more content like this, let us know, and maybe even consider supporting us on our website. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time for another tale of WoW mysteries.